and everything like that. Just to set the stage, I personally would consider you a local legend for Mid-Missouri, but just in case, people maybe aren't familiar with your connection to Mid-Missouri and everything, just go ahead and walk us through that. Like, what are your ties to this area?
Well, first off, it's so nice seeing you and being a part of this. As you know, I'm from Jefferson City. I moved there when I was 7 years old, so it's home to me. And I worked for KMIZ for the upwards of 6.5 years. So I am no stranger to the terrain and the area and the people. But yeah, it's home. I moved to New York, and I still come back to Missouri all the time, and it doesn't not feel like home ever. So.
For sure. Yeah, you and I, of course, we had the pleasure of sitting next to each other, both inside the newsroom and also here at this anchor desk as well. So, you and I have gotten a good chance to work together. I would say probably one of the more memorable times of us working together was May 22nd and May 23rd of 2019. I guess just go through as much as you remember from that night when the storm started to come into Mid-Missouri. What were you doing and what were you doing and what was your response?
So that night I was actually in the Jefferson City Bureau. A lot of times they would have me just stay down there because it was a couple minutes from home. I was down there with Barry, and I remember it was so bad out that they wouldn't allow us to drive anywhere. We had to come in and out of the Bureau. And the storm I didn't think it was that bad at that point, but that was also at 10 o'clock at night. And at that point, there was nothing for us to stay. There was no reason for us to stay. So we went home. And I do vividly remember being at home, the power went out. And I thought, I have no idea what's going on. Weather was still up and they were doing their thing. So I had the Storm Track app. And I remember Varnes kept telling me, you need to download this. I hadn't had it downloaded until the week before. And it's a good thing I had that thing because I wouldn't have known what was going on if I didn't have that because the power went out. And I remember hearing this sound. I was 5 miles away. My house was 5 miles away from where the tornado actually touched down. And I just remember hearing this train-like sound. I can't explain it any other way. And it didn't last too long, but it came and went a little bit for a couple of minutes, and then it just stopped. So I thought, you know what? Maybe I should go check this out. I wasn't obviously on the clock or anything like that. I had no camera crew, but I started hearing sirens. So I followed the sirens down 179, and I just kept going towards that area, I believe it was Ellis Boulevard, where that was like the main hub for everything happening. And I remember seeing it in the dark. It was about midnight, 1 o'clock, something like that. It was very dark, minus all the lights and sirens. And I thought, this is really bad. This is not something that Jefferson City sees a lot because, as I said, I'm from there. I grew up there as a little girl. I remember we would have tornado warnings, tornado watches, and we'd have to go to the basement, but nothing ever came to fruition. Nothing ever hit the ground and touched down like this. So I just kept thinking, I have got to get this up somehow or another. Like I said, I had no camera crew, I had no equipment, nothing. So I did that Facebook Live. And I think that's when you contacted me and you were like, I have to get down there. So you came next, and a couple of other media, but no, I was the first one to have something up, but I was so close. So, and my first thought when I saw it, I thought, this is gonna be really bad when the sun comes up. And I was really nervous for that because you couldn't see just how bad things were at that point. Like you saw the power lines down and you saw people just frantic. And I mean, when people started coming out of, I guess their homes or what was left of them, there were people crying. And it was just so sad to see all the destruction. I mean, and I said it over and over and over that night and into that morning. I think I was up for like 52 hours that day. We didn't stop. And I just remember thinking, these people lost most of their things, all of their things. There was a church that was destroyed that, that was really hard to see. And I remember the U-Haul Center was a mess. And then, of course, Riley Chevrolet. I don't think it's Riley anymore, but that was really bad.
Sure.
But yeah, it was just chaos. It was total chaos, and I'm not quite sure. I know that first responders, they train for this type of thing, but since it's never happened, it made me a little nervous to see how the cleanup was going to go.
Yeah, your Facebook Live, I've always kind of wondered this too, because your Facebook Live it was my first look at the damage that was done. Because yeah, I remember I was already off my work shift, and I was
Both of us were.
right. I hunkered down for the storm that came through Columbia, and I thought when that passed, like, okay, maybe we're through. And your Facebook Live, as I was getting ready for bed, was my first look that, like, oh, this is bad. Like something really bad happened here. And I always wondered how many other people maybe like that Facebook Live you did was their first like glimpse at what had happened that night.
So you know how you can like go through and see who's watching and
Yes.
who's commenting on those Facebook Lives? I remember within an hour or two, there was like tens of thousands of people who were watching it and viewing it. And that's when I thought, yeah, nobody can see anything because, we weren't a 24-hour news service. Once the show is over, it's over unless you
Right.
break in. So that was their only way of seeing anything. I don't even know why I did that. I just thought Barnes would probably want me to do this. That's
Yeah, our boss Curtis
So-
Barnes there in that case. No, probably a news instinct kicked in for you, but also
Yeah.
like an instinct. I'm sure like. I mean, did you have any sort of instinct as far as like feeling, this is my hometown, this is just sort of like my community, and so
it upset me.
Yeah.
And I got emotional a couple of times. Granted, I was very sleep deprived. After you work your shift and then you stay up for another, 40 hours or so, and you're in the field, it's just a totally different ball game than if you're sitting behind the desk because there's so much adrenaline, there's so much information coming at you. You just want to take it all in and you want to relay it to the audience as best you can. But I remember, and I have chills even talking about it, because that feeling that I had, I thought, it's not a big town. Granted, it's the state capital, but it's not a large town. Everybody's really tight knit there. And it just made me sad that something like this was happening. I always thought if there was going to be a tornado touchdown, I always thought it was going to be in Columbia because I feel like Columbia along 70 is like where everything happens with bad weather in central Missouri. I never in a million years thought that a tornado would touch down, especially at that velocity and as big as it was. I think it was an EF3 in Jefferson City, Missouri.
That was such an interesting sentiment for me to hear. I'm originally from the St. Louis area. To hear people, you were the first one to say it, and then I heard from so many other people in Jefferson City that exact feeling of, I think the feeling was that the river or something about kind of the way where Jefferson City would have made it less susceptible to tornadoes coming through.
Yeah, and where it hit down, I don't mean to interrupt, but where it touched down, I mean, there's a big dip.
Sure.
In that terrain. And I thought of all places it would hit in some place like California because it's very flat, especially going into like Tipton and the west side. That's where I always thought it would happen. I never thought that it would happen in the hilliest part of Jefferson City. And the Special Olympics, they're actually in a dip in the ground. So it was just kind of weird. It was just strange wherever it touched down, but it just goes to show you that Mother Nature doesn't care and it's going to drop wherever it wants.
What were you thinking as the night started to turn into day, right? Because at that point we had several more reporters and photographers there. The Missouri Task Force One, I remember at some point before the morning had shown up there. As you were saying, Ellis and Christie Drive, that area exactly was, I mean, tremendous amount of damage that was done there.
Yeah.
What did you start to think as it started to turn into day, as maybe it became a little more clear what everyone could see, and obviously as kind of the larger community began to wake up to this as well? Do you remember?
The first thing I thought when, I think it was around 5 or 6 a.m. when you could really start to see what was going on, I thought this is going to be expensive and this is going to take a long time to clean up. And then I remember vividly a woman, I can still actually see her face, walk up to me saying that she lost everything, that she had just lost a family member, and some of that family member's belongings were in the destruction, and she couldn't find it, and she was so upset, and it just upset me. You know, a lot of times as reporters, especially on the ground, you have to become kind of thick-skinned to everything, and you get kind of numb to things, but there are certain things that really get to you, and that really got to me. Not that I wasn't upset for everyone that was going through it, but it was the pain in her voice, and that's when I thought, this was traumatic for a lot of people. And I don't think a lot of people in Jeff City ever expected this to happen. So.
In just like almost the day after, like as that morning came though, I think you and I both witnessed a lot of people in that town begin to not only survey it, figure out what's damaged, who's hurt, who's okay, things like that, but I mean, immediately start to kind of help try to rebuild, maybe not immediately, but begin to kind of
it was pretty quick.
Wrap their arms around each other, right? Like that's an interview that I did for this special, is somebody used that term, wrap their arms around each other and help those that were damaged. Did you, like, I mean, does that play with kind of what you also witnessed, you know, both in this job but also personally, just coming from that town and what you saw too?
Oh yeah, and honestly, there's no part of me that ever thought that people in that town wouldn't come together and help others. They're very quick at jumping in to help. You know, that's what I was talking with, that tight knit community that they have. There was no part of me that ever thought that wouldn't happen, but it was a little shocking to see how quickly they came together. I mean, it was immediate. There were people even contacting me, hey, how can we help? How can we help? I didn't know them. I'm sure they didn't know the people that were affected. So that was really nice to see that come from Jefferson City. Even though I knew it would happen, I didn't think it was going to happen immediately. I mean, I'm talking before noon.
Yeah. Ash, I don't know if you've given it much thought. Where do you think that mindset comes from?
I don't know. You know, it's such a small town mentality. And I always say I come from a small town, but really it's not. You know, it's the state capital. And there's people that come in and out working for the state every day, all day. But the mentality is that small town mentality. And I think that's what makes Jefferson City so great, because you can rely on people to help you. And I always say that that's what I miss. That's probably what I miss the most about Central Missouri and Jefferson City in particular. And, you know, it could be that I'm from there and I know people, but at any given moment, if I needed something, there were so many people I could call that I hadn't even spoken to in years that would be there for me just like that. So it's just that small town mentality, that, you know, that good old boy saying. So that's how I feel about Jefferson City. And I know a lot of people feel that same way.
You did 6 months after the tornado. I thought you did a really good story with the Rileys and how the Chevrolet store there rebuilt. You mentioned it. They've since moved on from that store, but that was certainly their huge undertaking on rebuilding that. How much have you gotten to keep up with kind of the city rebuilding, things that maybe were damaged that have now been either rebuilt or they've done something new with it? Do you keep up much with just what has changed, and what are your thoughts on what you've seen in the town since?
Well, like I said, I come home, you know, fairly frequently, and I still keep in touch with the Rileys. They're family friends of mine, and they have been since we've been here way back in the day. But I do remember, I know it's not Riley Chevrolet anymore, but I remember seeing the building for the first time, and I thought, you know, this is really great. This is a beautiful building. Everything seemed to work out, you know, as best it could. I know they were down as far as being able to use certain sections of their lot for a while, but I've only driven through that area a couple of times since I've been back, but it doesn't look like they're sulking in it, if that makes any sense. They've moved on from it. They have moved on, and that's good. You know, the last thing I would want for that area is to be like, oh well, it was destroyed, and, you know, we couldn't move on from it. I'm glad they're able to move on and still live their lives.
How do you think, just maybe from on a professional side, you know, this is an awful thing that has happened, but, you know, for for news reporters, this is a very big thing, a very big, covering big storms is an important part of, the service that we provide. What do you think it taught you just as a journalist covering a tornado, especially in your hometown?
Well, it was the first natural disaster that I've covered on the ground. A lot of my time was spent behind the desk, especially those last few years at KMIZ. And it taught me that you really can't take anything for granted because you don't know what's going to happen, especially in those severe weather seasons. And I feel like ever since that tornado, like I said, we would go to the basement when I was a little girl because there were tornado warnings, that there was rotation. And I vividly remember those instances. But you remember the picture that they showed a couple of days after when the lightning struck and you could see the sheer volume of that tornado?
Oh,
it was
sure.
just like a flash. I remember seeing that and thinking, this thing was huge. And for it to come through my town, 5 miles from my home, my brother lived, another 5 miles from me. It was actually closer to him. I thought, you just can't take anything for granted because you don't know what's going to happen. Mother Nature doesn't care what you're doing or what time of day it is. And I think it really opened my eyes to taking that kind of stuff more seriously because, you go through 20 years of just having tornado watches, and then all of a sudden this happens in an area you don't think it's going to happen. You're like, I should probably take this more seriously. And ever since I have, we've had a couple of tornado watches up here, and I hear sirens, and I'm like, we're going to the basement. I'm not taking a chance with this.
Absolutely. Look, Ashley, I really appreciate your time and for kind of recounting a lot of your memories of the tornado and what happened. Is there anything that you want to share about that experience, maybe that we didn't talk about in this interview?
Yeah, it actually pertains to you and I on the ground. I remember with all the power lines being down, that was one thing that really scared me, is because I didn't know if there were live wires.
For sure. Yeah.
I didn't know, and I don't know if people understood quite how dangerous that could have been for reporters like us. Even though we're so tunnel visioned into, we have to just get the information out there. We have to show what's happening. And then there was glass falling in all these buildings. I mean, it was a dangerous situation that we just threw ourselves into. We didn't really think about it. And I mean, it goes to show, I was so proud of our team that, I was always proud of our team, but I was very proud of our team and how we handled that situation and how we were getting that information to the public so quickly. But I hope people understand that we are human too, and we're not just robots, behind a camera. We were out there in the thick of it, dealing with things, putting our safety on the line. And you were so helpful to me because I remember at one point, I was so mentally exhausted from being up, from hearing all these stories and seeing these people upset, watching police and fire work around the clock. You really helped me through that. And that kind of went to show, like those last few live shots, I thought, I think I told you, I don't think I can do this because I'm so mentally done. And you really helped me through that. And I always remember that. And that is that human aspect of news that I loved so much. But yeah, it was just for that small town to go through something like that. It was a lot for a lot of people to take in, even if they weren't directly impacted.
Yeah, it was an important story, a very important thing to have happened that needed to be covered. And, I knew nobody but you could really do that job. So I was happy to help nudge you forward as much as I could in that.
No, you were great.
Yeah.
Everyone, like I said, everyone was great that day.
Yeah.
But I do vividly remember you helping me through, especially in those last moments. So I still appreciate that 5 years later.
You had a long run at it, that is for sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll also say, I guess, I could name drop so many people at KMIZ at that time who were in Jefferson City reporting on it on all sorts of different ways. I'll give a special shout out to Jack McCormick. He worked the camera for us out there at that corner. So I remember he went with you walking up and down the street a lot as well. So
And another thing
special
for the
shout out.
camera guys, for the camera crew, they're so focused on us and getting the shot, they don't know what they're walking over.
sure.
And I mean, they could have walked through a live wire. I mean, that was what scared me the most, were the wires, like the wires down on the ground. And I remember some police and fire like, don't step on these, stay away from it. And here we are just going in the middle of it. But he did a great job that day.
For sure. Ashley, really appreciate it. Really, and, appreciate you taking the time and coming and sharing your memories of that May 2019 tornado.